However, since the F-35s did not come to Turkey, TCG Anadolu was made much more suitable for fully armed UAVs, helicopters, and other aircraft over time. It's also known that the ship's compatible rotary wing assets include T-129 Attack and Th-1 Super Cobra attack helicopters, as well as types such as 6 anti-submarine warfare helicopters. Turkish President Erdogan stated that the fixed-wing TIE-jet trainer light fighter aircraft can also land and take off from Anatolia. Considering all this data, Turkey's plans for TCG Anadolu also underline the country's desire to increase its ability to project power on a regional and even global scale. After the earthquake that devastated the country in February, the humanitarian aid capacity that Anadolu will provide cannot be underestimated. Now that TCG Anadolu has officially joined the Turkish Navy's fleet, it will certainly be interesting to see how the warship proves its multi-role operation concept with so much reliance on multiple types of drones. As armies around the world increasingly move towards integrating uncrewed assets into their operations, Turkey has already broken ground on this. After that, we will witness together what will be the moves of Ukraine's bravest ally, Turkey's defense industry, and what kind of military assistance Ankara will provide to the Kiev administration for the war with Ukraine and Russia. The greatest fear of all politicians is to go down in history in a very bad way. That's why politicians never want their political career to end in this way. They aim to influence history for a long time to come, but this does not always work. An allegation that is being discussed among politicians in Europe today is of great importance for the outcome of the war. They say that Lukashenko's political career is about to end. Putin no longer wants to cooperate with Lukashenko. This claim may lead to a change in the political balance all over the world. This research shows that the crisis in Belarus is very likely to affect the whole world. To talk about all this, let us first briefly recall the situation in Belarus. As you know, Belarus was founded in 1991 after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. In this process, it did not break its ties with the Russian Federation, which was established as a continuation of the Soviet Union. Relations between the two countries continued. In 1994, the first elections were held in Belarus, and Lukashenko became the country's first president. This election, won by Lukashenko, was recognized all over the world. However, after taking office, Lukashenko started to implement repressive policies. None of the results of the elections held after this election can be trusted. Lukashenko is interfering in the elections. Lukashenko uses state power to propagandize against his opponents. He uses state channels to accuse his political opponents of treason. This is destroying the legitimacy of the elections. In doing so, Lukashenko needed support. This support was provided by Putin in the 1999 elections. Vladimir Putin, who became the leader of Russia, established strong relations with Lukashenko from the moment he took office. In this way, Putin aimed to exert influence over Belarus. In a short period of time, he succeeded in achieving this goal. The Lukashenko administration in Belarus has faced many problems. Putin has always supported Lukashenko in solving these problems. However, this relationship has recently entered a crisis. Putin feels he's not getting enough support from Belarus in his invasion of Ukraine. Belarusian President Lukashenko is very reluctant to support this war. This attitude of Lukashenko has caused problems between the two countries. Since the beginning of the war, Russia has fired hundreds of missiles at Ukraine from Belarusian territory. But this was not enough for Putin. Putin did everything in his power to get Belarus to join this war. Despite Russia's demands, Belarus insisted on not going to war. This caused tensions between Lukashenko and Putin. The two leaders broke the cooperation they had maintained for nearly 25 years. European leaders started to talk about a very important claim. Allegedly, Russian President Vladimir Putin now wants the Belarusian president to change. For this, he has made very important moves. These moves have worried Lukashenko. According to the agreements between Russia and Belarus, if Belarus is attacked, Russia will defend the country. But Lukashenko is very worried about this agreement during his visit to Russia. Lukashenko held several meetings on this issue. First of all, he had a meeting with Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Lukashenko asked Sergei Shoigu what Russia could do for the defense of Belarus. However, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu gave very hesitant answers to these questions. After this meeting, Lukashenko also had a meeting with Putin, but this meeting did not go well for him. Lukashenko began to feel helpless. The election period is approaching in Belarus. Lukashenko is completely helpless this time because there was a great chaos in Belarus after the elections held in 2020. Lukashenko claimed to have won the elections with over 80% of the vote, but this was not the reality. The Belarusian people did not accept these election results and started a huge revolt. However, Lukashenko exerted great pressure to suppress these rebellions. Putin supported Lukashenko in this process. Lukashenko started arresting protesters after the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic spread around the world. Protesters in Belarus returned home, but this time, the Belarusian people say they will never allow the elections to be manipulated. Lukashenko needs Russia's support to stay in power because Western countries call Lukashenko Europe's last dictator. That's why they do not have good relations with Belarus. This hurts the Belarusian economy, but Lukashenko was preventing his country from going bankrupt thanks to Putin's economic support. But Putin no longer wants to send economic support to Lukashenko. There is nothing Lukashenko can do in this situation. Belarusians are already debating who should replace Lukashenko. The Belarusian people want liberal policies in line with the West. For this, Belarus's international relations will have to change completely. This will also reflect badly on Putin. European leaders are already discussing who will replace Lukashenko. This debate is very important for the future of world politics because Belarus is located between Europe and Russia and has a very important geographical position. European leaders want Belarus to pursue a policy in line with Europe, but Putin has different plans. As you know, Putin wanted the Belarusian army to go to war against Ukraine, but Lukashenko, fearing the reaction of the Belarusian people, did not allow it. The Russian army continues to suffer a very heavy defeat in Ukraine. According to Putin, Russia must attack through Belarus to capture Kiev. The southern border of Belarus is very close to Kiev. This may make Putin's job easier, but the Belarusian people do not want to be part of this war. Belarusians are furious about Putin's interruptions. Belarusians hate Putin. That's why they attach great importance to the new administration's independent policy vis-a-vis Russia. Putin fails to convince the Belarusian people. Putin is facing a huge public backlash in Russia, too. Putin's repressive policies are no longer accepted by the people. Putin is trying to fight both the Ukrainian army and the protesters, but he is failing in both. The growing protests in Russia are also being followed in Belarus. Belarusians are doing their best to get rid of Putin's repression. The elections in Belarus will be a turning point. The Belarusian people, European politicians and Kremlin leaders all agree on one thing. Lukashenko's political career is over. The leader of Belarus must change. If as a result of this change, the Belarusian government established a good relation with the West, this could completely change the course of the war. Russia is now using Belarusian military bases and airports. If Russia cannot use them, it will never win the war in Ukraine. Belarus government crisis has become one of the most critical issues of the war. Recently, the biggest news is coming from the east. Here, Russian commanders of the airborne forces, in an attempt to take all the credit for the Bakhmut operation, recently conducted a massive offensive and gained a lot of ground. However, their achievements were short-lived as Ukrainians quickly adjusted, dragged the Russians through the kill zones and conducted a successful counterattack, returning everything that they lost. Previously, I told you that Russian conventional forces conducted an intense attack in the northern part of the city, and due to the sheer manpower superiority, forced the Ukrainians to step back from their positions. I also told you that by the end of the day, Ukrainians managed to break the momentum by focusing their artillery fire on this region, which allowed them to start launching limited counterattacks. The freshest reports indicate that over the last 2 days, Ukrainian forces have been rapidly gaining momentum. The first confirmation of a Ukrainian success came from a Ukrainian fighter from the Baykar battalion. He stated that Ukrainians recaptured at least half of the high-rise buildings on the outer edge. Later, footage of the explosion was published showing how the Municipal Department of Culture was reduced to rubble. The explosion was controlled and conducted by Ukrainian forces, which clearly suggests that Ukrainians returned control over the second half of the high-rise buildings. Later, this information was confirmed by Russian forces that showed that Russians were trying to cross the alley. This means that today Ukrainians achieved 2 crucial objectives. Firstly, by destroying the building in the middle of the wide and open alley, Ukrainians significantly complicated Russian assaults because this building was the only thing that provided them cover. Secondly, Ukrainians secured control over the outer edge of the city, which allows destroying all Russian assault units that tried to approach Kremova and cut off one of the main supply routes to Bakhmut. Russians also partially retreated from the residential area with small houses. Today's combat footage showed how Russians are either retreating or abandoning their positions. This group was spotted near the rails and not all of them survived, which clearly indicates Ukrainian presence. After seeing that almost all gains generated by their extremely costly offensive effort had disappeared, Russians resorted to intense shelling. Ukrainian fighters reported that shelling was indeed very intense. Although Russians were late as the most important strong points were already recaptured, as the Russians noticed that the situation did not change in their favor, they started using massive guided air bombs. A Ukrainian fighter from the Baykar battalion reported that in the aftermath of artillery and aviation strikes, the residential area with small houses had been almost completely wiped out. So from now on, neither Ukrainians nor Russians cannot maintain a permanent presence in this region. Russians also changed their tactic, and right now they are assaulting Ukrainian positions in the following way. Firstly, they focused their artillery fire on a very narrow section of the front and then sent a human wave to try and capture a quarter. If it doesn't work, then they repeat the procedure. So far, it doesn't work. And in the evening, one of the fighters said that today Russians lost here at least 200 men. Heavy use of artillery and human waves consisting of large assault units is exactly how regular Russian forces work in other directions, which once again indicates that commanders of urban forces took over the operation in Bakhmut. When it comes to the central part of the region, the situation here stabilized compared to other days. Russians are still struggling to breach Ukrainian defense on the train station and also along Kosmonautiv Street. In the southern part of the region, Ukrainian drone operators continue surveilling in the area non-stop. Recent footage published by the fighters of the Ukrainian 93rd Mechanized Brigade showed how they detected a Russian assault unit that tried to advance in between houses and destroyed it with artillery fire. Overall, the recent Russian offensive effort to collapse the Ukrainian defense in Bakhmut failed. It looks like the commanders of the urban forces tried to simultaneously take over the operation, surprise Ukrainians with new tactics, and get the credit for ending the battle for Bakhmut. Unfortunately for Russians, Ukrainians quickly understood that Russian forces were overly concentrated and started retreating whenever necessary while Ukrainian artillery was eliminating hundreds of attackers. As a result, Russians ran out of men to sustain the same intensity of attacks. Their attack imploded and Ukrainians gradually took back almost all territories from which they temporarily retreated. What do you think about this? As Daily News team, we will continue to closely follow the developments in Russia and bring you the latest news. Our team spends a great deal of effort to prepare these news. You can support our team for the development of independent journalism. For this, you can use the Super Thanks button below the video. We also carefully read your comments on our news. We would like to know what you think about this incident. What do you think was the purpose of this attack? What do you think about the explosions in Russia, and how do you think this will affect the course of the war? Share your thoughts with us. Follow us for more updates.